April 3rd, 1865, the White House, Washington. Abraham Lincoln sits alone in the Red Room, describing a dream to his wife, Mary. He says he heard weeping down a corridor. He followed the sound to the East Room. There, he says, he found a coffin, guarded by soldiers, surrounded by mourners. He asked who had died. A soldier told him it was the president, killed by an assassin. Mary begs him to stop. He does not. 10 days later, he tells the story again to his bodyguard and to a journalist named Ward Hill Layman. Layman writes it down that night, word for word. He calls it the strangest thing he has ever heard a sane man describe. Lincoln laughs it off in front of others. In private, he admits the dream returns to him again and again. It is not the only warning. 3 years earlier, in 1862, Lincoln had caught his own reflection in a mirror and seen two faces staring back, one paler than the other. Mary took it as an omen that he would not survive a second term. Lincoln told her it was likely just a trick of the light. Still, he mentioned it more than once. By early April 1865, the war is ending. Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox on the 9th. Washington celebrates for 4 straight days. Lincoln's mood, those close to him say, is lighter than it has been in years. On the morning of April 14th, he tells his cabinet he dreamed the same dream again. The ship, the strange vessel moving fast toward a dark and indefinite shore. He has had that dream, he says, before nearly every major victory of the war. That evening, he and Mary decide to attend a play at Ford's Theater. His bodyguard, William Crook, says goodbye to him for the night. Lincoln does not say goodnight back. He says goodbye. Crook later calls it the only time in years Lincoln used that word with him. At the theater, Lincoln takes his seat in the presidential box just after 9 o'clock. The play is a comedy. He laughs along with the audience. Behind him, a single guard is posted outside the box, then leaves his post to watch the show from another seat. The door to the box is left unguarded. At 10:15 p.m., a man steps quietly into the box from behind. He is an actor, well known on the Washington stage, and he has walked these halls before. He raises a small Derringer pistol and fires once, point blank, into the back of Lincoln's head. Lincoln slumps forward. Mary screams. The assassin leaps from the box to the stage below, catching his spur on a flag as he falls, breaking a bone in his leg. He shouts a line in Latin, then limps into the wings and out a back door, where a horse was already waiting. Doctors carry Lincoln across the street to a boarding house. He is laid diagonally across a bed too short for his frame. He never regains consciousness. He dies the next morning at 7:22, surrounded by his cabinet and his son. Within hours, federal agents launched the largest manhunt in American history to that point. 12 days later, they corner the assassin in a Virginia tobacco barn. He is shot and dies before sunrise. But one question is never fully answered. Lincoln had described his own death in detail more than once, to more than one person, weeks before it happened. His guard changed his goodbye without explanation. His wife saw two faces in a mirror 3 years before a bullet found one of them. Historians call it coincidence, the ordinary anxieties of a wartime president given shape in sleep. Others are not so sure. Ward Hill Layman kept his written account of the dream for the rest of his life. He never once changed the story. The dream was recorded 3 weeks before Ford's Theater. April 15th, 1865, Washington, D.C. 2 hours after Lincoln's death, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton takes control of the investigation from a small telegraph office. He orders every road out of the capital sealed. By dawn, the name of the shooter is already known: John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor from one of the most respected theatrical families in the country. Stanton wires a description to every telegraph station on the eastern seaboard within hours. It is the fastest manhunt the nation has ever mounted. Meanwhile, Booth is already miles away, riding south with a broken leg, guided by a network of Confederate sympathizers who had helped smuggle men and messages across the Potomac for years. He stops before dawn at the home of a doctor named Samuel Mudd, who sets the bone without asking many questions. Mudd will later claim he did not recognize his patient. Investigators will not believe him. For the next 11 days, Booth and a companion named David Harold move through the swamps of southern Maryland and across the Rappahannock River into Virginia, sleeping in pine thickets, reading newspaper accounts of their own manhunt by lantern light. Booth is stunned to learn the public does not see him as a hero. He had expected the South to celebrate. Instead, even Confederate sympathizers turn him away at the door. On April 24, a cavalry detachment traces the pair to a tobacco farm near Port Royal, Virginia, owned by a man named Richard Garrett. Soldiers surround the barn before sunrise on the 26th. Harold surrenders. Booth refuses. The barn is set on fire to force him out. Through a gap in the wooden slats, a sergeant named Boston Corbett fires a single shot against direct orders to take Booth alive. The bullet strikes Booth in the neck. He is dragged from the burning barn and dies on the farmhouse porch 3 hours later, 12 days, almost to the hour after he fired the shot at Ford's Theater. His last words, witnesses say, were about his hands. He asked someone to lift them so he could see them one final time. In Washington, the funeral becomes something the country has never staged before. Lincoln's body travels by train for nearly 3 weeks, retracing in reverse the same route he took to his first inauguration, stopping in city after city so the public can view the open casket. Historians later estimate that 1 in 4 Americans alive at the time see the train pass or view the body directly. Mary Todd Lincoln does not leave the White House for 5 weeks. She cannot bring herself to attend the funeral. In the trial that follows, 8 conspirators stand accused of plotting not just Lincoln's death, but simultaneous attacks on the Vice President and the Secretary of State that same night. 4 are hanged in July, including a boarding house owner named Mary Surratt, the first woman ever executed by the federal government. Dr. Samuel Mudd escapes hanging by 1 vote and is sentenced to life in a military prison instead. Through all of it, one detail keeps resurfacing in newspapers and private letters: the dream. Ward Hill Layman's written account begins circulating in the years after the assassination, first in private correspondence, then in a memoir he publishes decades later. He insists he never altered a word of what Lincoln told him that April evening. Historians who study the document note something unusual. Layman had no reason to invent it. He was not seeking money or fame from the story. He simply kept the pages for the rest of his life in a dream.
Skeptics point out that memory is unreliable, that grief reshapes what people remember hearing, that dreams of death were common enough among wartime leaders that a coincidence was almost inevitable. But no one has ever produced a version of the dream that contradicts Layman's original account. Every retelling matches. The pages are still in an archive today.
February 11, 1861, Springfield, Illinois. Abraham Lincoln boards a train bound for Washington to begin his first term as president. Before he leaves, he tells a small crowd of neighbors he does not expect to return alive. He is 51 years old. The war has not yet started. Nobody in the crowd takes the remark seriously. 3 years earlier, in 1858, during his failed Senate campaign against Stephen Douglas, Lincoln had already written privately to a friend that he believed he would die a violent death. He gave no reason for the belief. He simply stated it as fact, the way a man states his own height. His law partner, William Herndon, later says Lincoln spoke about death with unusual ease for a man his age, almost as if he had already made peace with a date he could not see. In November 1860, the night he wins the presidential election, Lincoln goes home and lies down on a horsehair sofa. In the mirror across the room, he sees his reflection split into 2 faces. He gets up, walks away, and lies back down. The image returns.
He mentions it to his wife the next morning, almost casually. It is the same mirror vision that will resurface again in 1862, and again in the years after, each time interpreted by those around him as an omen about his survival. During the war, Mary Todd Lincoln begins hosting seances inside the White House, hoping to contact their young son Willie, who died of typhoid fever in 1862. Lincoln attends several of these sessions himself, more out of concern for his grieving wife than personal belief, according to those who were present. Still, witnesses report that during at least one session, Lincoln asks the medium directly whether he will live to see the end of the war. The answer, according to the account, is vague.
Throughout 1864 and early 1865, Lincoln receives dozens of threatening letters. He keeps many of them in a folder marked simply "Assassination," stored in a desk drawer in his office. His secretary, John Hay, later says Lincoln read them without visible alarm, sometimes aloud, sometimes with something close to dark humor. Lincoln tells close friends that if someone is determined to kill the President of the United States, no security detail in the world can stop a man willing to trade his own life for it. He refuses repeated offers of a larger guard. On the afternoon of April 14th, 1865, hours before he attends the play at Ford's Theater, Lincoln tells his wife he has never felt happier in his life. He says the war is over and the country can finally begin to heal. Historians who study this moment note a strange contradiction. A man who has spent years describing his own death in vivid detail spends his final afternoon at peace, almost lighter than he has been in years, as though some weight has already been set down.
After the assassination, the story of the dream becomes something larger than a private memory. It spreads through newspapers, through pulpits, through parlor conversations across the country, retold and reshaped with each telling. Some versions add details that never appear in Ward Hill Layman's original written account. Others strip the story down until only the coffin remains. Historians spend more than a century trying to separate what Lincoln actually said from what grief and legend added afterward. What survives the closest scrutiny is Layman's version, written the way he heard it, kept unchanged in his own hand for the rest of his life. Psychologists who study wartime leaders point out that Lincoln carried the weight of hundreds of thousands of deaths for 4 years, and that dreams of mortality are common under that kind of pressure. Historians point out that the dream, the mirror, the folder of threats, and the final calm afternoon form a pattern that is easy to see only in hindsight, after the fact has already happened. Either explanation leaves the same question standing. A president described the exact shape of his death more than once to more than one witness, and then walked toward it anyway. The folder marked assassination is still in the archives, alongside the letters he chose to keep. April 15, 1865, 7:22 a.m. William H. Seward, the outgoing Secretary of State, learns Lincoln is dead while recovering in his own bed from a separate attack the same night. His throat still bandaged from a knife wound inflicted by one of Booth's co-conspirators. He was meant to die too. He survives. Vice President Andrew Johnson, a Tennessee Democrat chosen for balance rather than shared vision, is sworn in within hours, alone in a Washington hotel room, without ceremony or crowd. Nobody planned for this. Lincoln had spent his final weeks quietly signaling a lenient path for the defeated South, telling his cabinet just days earlier that he wanted no bloody work, no persecutions, no hangings. Johnson inherits that unfinished plan without inheriting the trust Lincoln had built to carry it out. Within a year, Johnson clashes openly with Congress over how quickly former Confederate states should be readmitted and what protections free people should receive.
Radical Republicans, who had once seen Lincoln as too cautious, now see Johnson as an outright obstacle. In 1868, he becomes the first American president ever impeached, surviving removal by a single vote in the Senate. Historians still debate what Reconstruction might have looked like under Lincoln instead, since he alone had the political capital from both the North and an exhausted South that no successor would ever fully hold. What is certain is that the version of Reconstruction that did happen, uneven, contested, ultimately rolled back within 12 years, is inseparable from the fact that its original architect never lived to see it built. Meanwhile, the manner of Lincoln's death changes the presidency itself. Before April 1865, no sitting American president had ever been assassinated. Security around the office had been almost an afterthought, a single guard who could simply wander off to watch a play. Congress does not create a permanent Secret Service protective detail for presidents until 1901, after two more assassinations. Garfield and McKinley forced the issue. For 36 years, the country treats Lincoln's death as a singular tragedy, rather than a warning about a pattern. The image of Lincoln himself also changes almost overnight. In life, he had been mocked in cartoons for his appearance, criticized in newspapers as a backwoods lawyer unfit for the office, doubted by his own cabinet more than once. In death, within days, that image is replaced by something closer to a martyr, a man who saved the Union and paid for it with his life. Poet Walt Whitman, who had seen Lincoln ride through Washington many times during the war, writes some of his most enduring lines about the assassination within weeks, cementing a public grief that never fully cools, one still visible in the memorial built for him decades later. Sculptors, biographers, and later filmmakers spend the next century and a half returning to the same handful of details: the dream, the mirror, the 10-day countdown between Appomattox and Ford's Theater.
Some historians argue this mythology obscures the more difficult, contested parts of Lincoln's actual record, his gradual and sometimes reluctant path toward emancipation, his often brutal wartime suspension of civil liberties, his complicated views on race that would trouble many modern readers. The martyr narrative, they argue, flattens a genuinely complicated man into a symbol too clean to interrogate. Others argue the symbol still carries real weight precisely because the man beneath it was not clean, that a leader who doubted himself, who feared his own death for years, who made costly mistakes and admitted some of them, chose to walk into Ford's Theater anyway on a night he said he had never felt happier. 160 years later, historians still return to the same folder in the same archive, the one marked Assassination, looking for what it might have told him and what it did not.
May 1865, Washington, D.C. The War Department locks away a stack of documents seized in the assassination investigation. sealed for what officials call reasons of national security. Some of those files remain classified for more than 60 years. At the center of the unanswered questions is a simple fact investigators never fully resolve. Was John Wilkes Booth acting alone with a small circle of conspirators? Or was he a paid instrument of the collapsing Confederate government, then based in Richmond and desperate in its final months? Evidence points both ways. Booth had met repeatedly with Confederate agents in Montreal in the months before the assassination. Confederate leadership had, on paper, approved a plan to kidnap Lincoln earlier that year, a plan Booth had originally trained his conspirators to carry out. That kidnapping plot collapsed in March 1865, only weeks before Lincoln's death, when the president changed his travel plans at the last moment. Some historians argue Booth simply escalated his own failed kidnapping scheme into an assassination on his own initiative, with no direct order from Richmond. Others point to money. Investigators later trace roughly $15,000 that passed through Booth's hands in the weeks before the shooting, an amount his acting income alone could not explain. Where that money came from is never conclusively proven. Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, is arrested a month later and briefly imprisoned, partly on suspicion of ordering the assassination. He is never charged with it. The theory dies not from disproof, but from a simple, practical problem. No surviving document directly links Richmond's leadership to Booth's final decision to kill rather than kidnap. Meanwhile, Mary Todd Lincoln spends the remaining 17 years of her life increasingly convinced that unseen forces surround her. She continues attending seances into the 1870s, searching for contact not just with her husband, but with her son Willie, and later a second son, Tad, who dies young as well. In 1875, her surviving son Robert has her committed to a mental health facility for several months, citing her erratic spending and behavior. She is released within a year after a second legal hearing rules in her favor, and she spends much of her remaining life in Europe, distant from the country whose history she had once stood at the center of. She dies in 1882 in the same Springfield house where she and Lincoln were first neighbors as young newlyweds. In the same small city his funeral train once passed through in reverse. Boston Corbett, the sergeant who fired the shot that killed Booth against direct orders, is never formally punished. He receives a share of the reward money, then gradually withdraws from public life, growing increasingly paranoid about being targeted by Booth's remaining sympathizers. He is later committed to a state asylum in Kansas after firing a weapon inside a legislative chamber. In 1888, he escapes and is never seen again. What became of him afterward has never been established. Ward Hill Layman, the man who wrote down Lincoln's dream in April 1865 and never once changed his account, dies in 1893, 28 years after the assassination he had unknowingly foretold decades in advance. His memoir, published the year before his death, becomes one of the primary sources historians still cite when they study the dream, precisely because he had nothing left to gain by inventing it. Across 5 chapters and 160 years, the same objects keep resurfacing in archives. A folder marked Assassination, a mirror that once showed 2 faces, a journal entry written the same week as a warning, a stopped watch reading 7:22. None of them explain what happened at Ford's Theater. All of them sat quietly in the same rooms as a man who somehow already knew.